Old Testament survey. Have I got this on? I've got that on. Old Testament survey, the judges. I was looking back after I wrote this, I was looking at my notes from my class of Old Testament survey in college, and they actually spent more time on this than I'm planning to. So we'll see how this goes, because you may have some questions in here that you would like me to discuss at a little more detail. So we're going to survey Judges today, and then if there's more detail, we can bring that in. So we've got the timeline again to start with. Don't know exactly the date of creation, somewhere back there. Then the flood and nations is about 2500 BC, give or take. Oh, did I not pass out the sheets? Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know where I'm at. My head is, yeah. Okay, and then the patriarchs. So 1846 BC, that's Abraham. Moses and the Exodus, 1446 BC. And then I'm adding in this time the conquest, which is basically 1406 BC and following. All right, and so we talked about Joshua last time and the conquest. The death of Joshua comes 1361 BC with a question mark. You have to sort of make some assumptions in trying to ascertain when Joshua passed, what year, if you're trying to put a date to it. At the end of Joshua, it says he lived 110 years before he died. So it could be, so we don't know. So again, this is a date that I saw in certain commentaries and articles on this, roughly in that time range, I would say. Okay, so we're just going to go with some estimates here. And then the period of the judges, again, I'm going to say after the death of Joshua, I'm going to say approximately 1350 BC to 1120 BC, approximately. Now I'll explain why I'm being so hesitant about the dates when we get to the end of this lesson. All right, so the first thing we want to talk about is the Judges cycle. And I'm just going to give you some outline notes. The first chapter of Judges is basically an overlap with Joshua. So some of the things that are being described in chapter 1 actually happened in the period of Joshua. And also parts of chapter 2 happened in the period of Joshua. So that is just, when you start reading it, it may seem a little confusing. You think, I thought we just finished this in Joshua. Yes, you did. So don't be confused. All right, so that's the answer to that confusion. Second point is God's complaint against Israel. And that's the first 5 verses of chapter 2. So I'm going to read that section. Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim. And he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. You shall tear down their altars. But you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. When the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept. So they named that place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord. I think Bochim means weeping. Okay? So that is, first of all, God's complaint. So God says, I told you not to make any covenants. You made covenants. And I want to say that even the covenant with Gibeon that they kept, and once they kept it, then they made an oath, and God held them to that oath. It's going to play out later in the reign of Saul. But the fact is, I believe that, first of all, they didn't pray about it when they made the covenant with the Gibeonites. Secondly, they didn't consult God when they found out the truth. And I believe that a covenant falsely entered into is not binding. Right? I don't think if they had gone to God the second time, I think God would have given them a solution and they would not have had a covenant with the Gibeonites. But in both sides of the equation, they failed to consult God, and they made a grievous mistake which plagued them for many years. All right, now, But that wasn't the only thing they did, and apparently there were others that they failed to drive out, and you will see evidences of that in the first chapter of Judges and also other parts of even in Joshua at some points. All right, so now the Judges cycle. Now I'm going to I'm going to read this to you, then I'll just put I guess you've got it on your notes. Let me just give it to you then. So I would call it rebellion, repression by a foreign power, relief, exploits of a judge, rest for some years, and then rebellion, and repeat. Okay? So it's funny, I was going for R's, as you can see in my outline. I'm always glad when I can do that. My professor, he did it with S's, so I was looking back at the notes. Anyway, let's read this section, verse 11 to 23. This gives us the Judges cycle. Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord and the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord to anger. So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. Now Baal is a male deity, the Ashtaroth is a female deity, and they are gods of nature. Baal is the thunder god, and basically the idea is it's a fertility cult. Okay, so that's to encourage your crops. You worship these gods. That was the theory behind the pagan religion, and we don't need to say too much more about that. But that is what they're doing. They forsook the Lord, served Baal and the Ashtaroth. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of plunderers, who plundered them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had spoken, as the Lord had sworn to them, so that they were severely distressed. Then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers. When the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge and delivered them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. But it came about when the judge died that they would turn back and act more corruptly than their fathers in following other gods to serve them and bow down to them, and they did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and has not listened to my voice, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. So the Lord allowed those nations to remain, not driving them out quickly, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua. All right, so that's the judges cycle. You can see, so they're rebelling against God, so then God sends a repression. And that is, obviously the foreign powers are operating on their own greed and their own lust for power and property, but they are being moved by God, and God is allowing this to happen. Then there's the relief. The people pray, oh God, we sinned. Okay, they pray. So God says, all right, okay, after a while, he says, I will send a judge. And so he'll raise up a judge. And usually there is some, and probably most of the circumstances, as I'm thinking about it, that we know about, there is some unusual aspect of the judge that allowed that judge to win the victory over the oppressors and get some relief. Then they have rest, as long as that judge is alive. Then he dies. And sometimes they carry on for a few years after that, but soon they're back into their idolatry, and then God sends another oppression or repression. Okay? So that's the judge's cycle. Any comments or questions on that first bit? Okay, we're good? That's pretty self-explanatory. So let's look at the next bit then, the judge's list, but first we're going to have the screen. You see, this is from Barrett's book, and he is illustrating basically where Israel was located at this point in history. And the green part is where the nation has settled. So, and you can see, does he give you the tribes? Not exactly. It's not laid out by the tribes, but it's mostly the high country. So the plain by the Mediterranean Sea, that was part of what God promised to them, but because they didn't drive out the nations, and down there they had iron chariots where the chariots would be more effective. So the chariots were a tremendous weapon of war, but especially on flat terrain. If you're fighting in the mountains, chariots don't work so well. Okay, so on Vancouver Island we'd be safe. We've got very hilly country, so maybe down here in Victoria the chariots might take over. But anyway, that's just another thing. So then I'm going to show you the list. All right. So starts with Othniel. Othniel's I believe a son-in-law of Caleb. So he's the first named judge, and I'm just giving the references. And then Ehud, the left-handed judge, and so he comes in and that's quite a dramatic story. Slays the Moabite king by stealth, and then they raises an army and they defeat the Moabites and drive them off. And Moab is down here on the bottom right of the screen, if you see. So they had come around and were oppressing them. Now the next one is Shamgar. Shamgar, his weapon was an ox goad. That's what he defeated the enemy with. So he's well known for that one. Then we have Deborah, a woman judge. Now she doesn't do any fighting, but she is the one that leads the nation. Barak is her general, and then Jael defeats the Canaanite enemy by offering him refuge in her tent and driving a nail through his forehead. So that was how that one ended up. Then we have Gideon, the famous Gideon. Now, I'm actually in my Bible reading, I've just covered Gideon. God used him and 300 men to throw off a large army. Okay. Now, Gideon himself was not completely faithful. He brought in idol worship back into Israel. Okay. So we see the flaws even in these men. Then Abimelech, Judges 9:6, we don't know much about him. Tola, again, we don't know much about him. Jair, another one we don't know much about. And then Jephthah, okay? And so he is in the eastern region, and he is fighting off the Ammonites. You see Ammon there on the map. Then Ibzan, let's see, Elon Musk? No, some other Elon. Some other Elon. And Abdon. Some of these names, all we have in the scripture is one verse. That's all. It just named the judge, and so that's all we know about him, is what there's in that verse. Then Samson, we know a lot about Samson. What a flawed character, right? God uses a flawed character, and that's exactly who he is. All right. And then Eli. Now, Eli is not listed in the book of Judges, but he is in 1 Samuel, and he is called a judge in 1 Samuel. He's really in a sense, the last of the judges. But we'll also add here Samuel. Now, Samuel is also named as judging Israel, but he has the office of a prophet. And so some scholars do not include Samuel as a judge. Now, I'm going to give you one other map from Barrett's book, and this one has the location of the judges, and you can see where they're located on the map there. The only one that's not identified there would be Eli, and he would be, if you see just below Abdon, you see the name Shiloh, and that's where Eli would be located. And he would be especially operating against the Philistines, not too successfully. And then finally, Samuel will come in and take his place, and he will win a decisive victory over the Philistines. All right, so that's in the judges list. All right, any questions about the judges? Any of the names stick out to you? Anything you'd like me to elaborate on? Rob?
I think Shiloh is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept before it was moved to Jerusalem.
That's right, for at least part of the time. At least part of the time, yes. And that's why I say Eli would be located there. All right. Suzanne, sorry, I was running through the database to pull your name out.
Well, I'm just wondering, what did they do, judges? Like, who did they judge?
Well, these are military, well, okay, so they did judges, they were judges in the sense of like a civil or legal law court judge. That's part of their function. So they would be, if somebody had a case in Israel, they would come to the judge would decide the case. So that's part of what their function was. But each of these people were military leaders as well. So when they had an invading army, so we have different nations on the map here. You have Moab and Ammon and Philistia, the Philistines, but there are others who came in and would basically steal all their crops, murder and rape and try to oppress the people and take taxes and to put them under a great deal of burden. And in fact, for example, under Gideon, the Moabites were, is that right, the Moabites under Gideon? I think so. I sort of have that in my head. Anyway, Gideon, the oppressors made it so that as soon as the harvest came in, they'd know the timing of the harvest. They'd sweep in, take all of the crops, and leave the people with nothing. And so Gideon was thrashing one of the crops, barley or wheat or something, in the wine press. Okay, so it was in secret, in a place where they wouldn't know it was happening, so that his people would be able to store away and hide some food in the strongholds. So that's the kind of thing that these foreign nations were doing to them. These were judgments from God because of the sins of Israel. So eventually, this is the way the judges cycle works, eventually when the people had enough of it and they said, okay, God, we've sinned, we know we sinned, please help us, then God would raise a judge to become a military deliverer for them. Right, Maureen?
Physically fight them.
Yes, physically fight them. Yeah. In the case of Gideon, initially Gideon had somewhere around 20,000 men recruited, and God said, that's too big, you need to cut it down. So he cut it down to 10,000. God said, no, that's still too big. And so he had them take the men to the water and watch how they drink. And everybody that bends down and laps like a dog, they're out. If they stick their hand in and drink it this way, and they're watching, keep them. Only 300 men like that. So God used 300 men to defeat the army that was facing Gideon. The Midianites. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you. The Midianites, not the Moabites. Well, it started with M, so I had one letter correct. All right? But this is exactly the kind of thing. We have different stories for each one of them. Some of them we have more. So the ones we have the most, Ehud, Deborah and Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson, and then Eli. The rest of them, most of the time, we just have one verse. Okay? And that's about all. All right, go ahead.
Sir, does it mean Eli
Yes.
combine the post of priesthood and judge?
Yes. He's called both of those in Samuel. Like, he doesn't show up in the book of Judges, but really he is. And also I should mention, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Jephthah, Samson, Eli, and Samuel on the latter part of this are basically contemporaries. They're in different parts of the country, but they were operating roughly at the same time, overlapping somewhat. Okay? Any other questions on this? Yes, Suzanne.
Well, at a time when women were nothing, how did Deborah get to be a judge?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because Deborah, it's just interesting. We really don't know how this happened. She's just announced. She's just introduced. Deborah was judging. Okay, so then we have, so she goes to this Barak. I forget which nation it was they're fighting against. So she says, Barak, God has called you to lead an army to defeat these, whoever it is, right? The Canaanites. Yes, the Canaanites. Okay, so Barak says, well, he says, that's fine. He says, but I won't go unless you go with me. Like, what a real manly man. He's got to have the woman along. And she says, okay, I'll go, but that means the glory will not go to you. It'll go to a woman. But it doesn't go to her. It goes to this other woman, Jael, who actually wins the victory by destroying the general of the Yes, Sisera, yeah, that's right. So it's quite a story. These are, I preached through this book a few years ago. These are fascinating stories, and interesting how God works. But yes, it's like, the thing is, often Christianity is accused of putting women down. Now, Christianity does teach, and the Bible teaches, that there are different roles for men and women. But the fact is, in the Bible, God does not put either men or women down. He gives opportunities, and we see this all through history, that this is true. And women have a very high position in the Bible. That's absolutely correct. All right, Tola.
Yeah. Like what you were saying, where the question she asked, because when I read from King James Version,
Yes.
the Bible said there was a time Israel was without king.
Yes.
And everybody does what's right.
That's right.
Maybe that time it was Deborah
Yeah.
that was closer to God, that
Yeah.
God can use. And
Well,
talk to.
certainly in that case, that's true. This woman was closer to God than the men in her region. That's right. All right, Augustine.
I've always noticed that after after being remorseful,
Yes.
I mean, fasted, prayed, and God forgave them.
Yes.
After some time, they go back to the same thing.
Exactly. Yes.
Multitude, or what would we say?
Well, it just shows the perversity of the human heart. And it's like, they're remorseful when things are bad, and then things sort of even out. Oh, okay. All right, well, we don't have to be so strict anymore, right? And this happens over and over again in human history, and certainly in Israel at this time. Maureen?
Would you say that's sort of what's happening in our, like, we're in good times,
Yeah.
and the Christian church is quite weak?
I would say that's true in our times as well, yes. The Christian church is weak. The Bible isn't preached, as you know, okay? And, I mean, I'm not saying, oh, goody, that means we're going to get judgment, because I do not want judgment. I have a low pain threshold. I do not want any of that. But we can't look at our current situation and say God is going to just let things go. Ultimately, this has to be resolved. Okay. Yes, Tola.
At times, corruption.
Yeah.
At times when God has lifted you up, like Gideon.
Yeah.
Because God used him and conquered and
Yeah.
was successful.
Yes.
Corruption came.
Yes.
And he began to follow the small gods.
Yes.
That is the heart of man.
Well, that is in the
That's
heart of
why
man.
you
Yeah.
are not, when God is using you, just be prayerful and be watchful.
Yes.
If not, we are prone to go away from the will of God.
Yeah, we're prone to go away from the will of God. And I think, you see, like even in the ministry of Joshua, although he had all these great victories, there are those little things. Even in the book of Joshua, you'll see, oh, they didn't quite do what God said.
Yeah.
And so we have this, again, we see this in Judges as well. And same with the kings. Most of the kings
Yeah.
did not quite follow God wholeheartedly. Most of them. Some of them, pretty close. Some of them, probably the greatest ones were Hezekiah, David, Josiah. I mean, they all had their flaws. But those are probably the best of the kings. But we'll get to them after a bit. Okay, now let me, let's see, was there something else I wanted to say on this point? Does anybody else have any questions here before I go on? I just want to make sure I'm not. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. And this is the point where we're going to have another problem with numbers. The judges' numbers. Okay, so the period of the judges, approximately, notice I'm saying 1350 BC to 1120 BC. Now this is based on, or derived from an article by Eugene Merrill, okay, who wrote the textbook that I refer to a lot. He wrote an article on this. Okay, and the article is titled Paul's Use of About 450 Years in Acts 13:20. Okay, so this is a total, if you could look at that number, of about 230 years. Some start the period a bit earlier. Some would say Othniel is at 1371 BC. And then end a bit later with 1091 for Eli, which yields a number of 280 years. All right, now, why am I making a big deal about this? So, let's look at this statement in the book of Acts. This is the Apostle Paul. He says, this is the Apostle Paul. he's preaching in, let's see, Acts 13. This is, let me think. I think it's Antioch of Pisidia. Okay, he's preaching there in the synagogue. All right. When he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he distributed their land as an inheritance, all of which took about 450 years. After these things, he gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. Okay, so 450 years is the time frame that Paul in this sermon gives to the judges period. Now, why do we make an issue out of this? Well, because we believe the Bible is inspired by God, and according to the Scriptures, it is accurate. So what does Paul mean? Notice I've got a judges period of 230 or maybe 280 years. Okay, so how does Paul get 450 years? All right, so let's give you some things, some data here to go with this. It'll show up here. There it goes. Okay. Okay, so this is a chart of the judges. Now, we don't have all the judges by name, but we're just looking at the counts. If you look in those references, you'll find the years that are mentioned. Okay, so you have an oppression period, and so all of the years that are mentioned in those records. Then the judges period, so the years that the judge is judging, and there's peace. Okay, so you add those up. And then you have the rest period. Sometimes after a judge, it'll say, so-and-so judged so many years, and the land had rest for so many years. And so you notice those years. So you add all those years up. At the bottom, you have 111 years of oppression, 96 years of judging, and 200 years of rest, and that gives a grand total of 407 years accounted for in the book of Judges. Okay, so I'm going to give you a statement. This is from Eugene Merrill's article. I'll just read this to you. The thesis proposed here, this is how he solves the problem, is that Paul's figure of 450 years is not to be taken as a round number for something vastly different. In other words, Paul is not rounding off 280 years into 450. Does that make sense? Okay. But is instead a remarkably precise number arrived at by taking the numerical data of the book of Judges and 1 Samuel at face value, and with no allowance for synchronism, in other words, for overlapping of judges, lapses, or other possibilities which must be entertained in a truly scientific approach to the problem. The only other occurrence of the phrase, and he judged Israel, is in 1 Samuel 4:18, which says of Eli, and he judged Israel 40 years. When these years are added to the previous total of 407, the new sum is 447 years, a figure remarkably close to 450, and naturally to be rounded, as Paul does, to about 450 years. So I think that's what Paul has in his mind. He has the numbers that are referenced in the book of Judges, plus the period of Eli's judgeship, and that comes up with this number of 450. All right, now, so far, I'm just going to stop here. Do you understand what is being said? Anybody have a question? Rob?
Sorry, my brain was jumping ahead of me. So is he saying, I'd have to reread it, is he saying basically when you add Eli in, then that's the number? When
you add Eli in, that gives you 447 years that are mentioned in the Bible as periods of judgeship.
And without him, it's the 230 or 280?
No. Without him, it's 407.
Okay.
So you're adding all of these numbers. Now, you're not overlapping anybody. So we know, and I'm going to show you in just a minute, that Samson and whoever it is, Jephthah and Eli overlapped.
So he's looking at their life as a judge.
He's looking at them not in the sense of chronologically, the way we would sort of think, oh, well, this is how we do things, right? But he's looking at the total numbers of years that are mentioned in the book of Judges, plus the 40 years mentioned in the book of Samuel.
That makes sense.
Okay? All right, so that's anybody else? I'm not sure you're clear on what the argument is. Anybody else got that?
Yeah.
So we're not, he's not saying that these numbers that we have in the book of Judges are necessarily consecutive. Okay? Because as we are going to see, there's actually some overlap. So what Paul is talking about in the sermon is the total, not the history. Okay? All right. So here's the further discussion now. It is quite clear that some judges were contemporaries of each other. Samson, Jephthah, and Eli all overlapped in their dates, and clearly the Philistines and the Ammonites overlapped in their oppression. So Samson and Eli fought against the Philistines. Jephthah fought against the Ammonites. So here's the verse that proves that. Judges 10:7. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hands of the sons of Ammon. That's Judges chapter 10. So then he goes on, in that passage, he goes on to then deal with, first of all, Jephthah, okay, in the book of Judges. And the story of Jephthah is what follows, and how he deals with the Ammonites. When he's finished with Jephthah, he goes back and starts talking about Samson. But he's actually going back in time to chapter 10, verse 7. They're happening, they're coincidence, they're happening basically at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay. So then, our last statement here, in this section, though not stated, it is likely that the other judges or oppressions overlapped as well, because the judges were regional and not national. Okay? And so let me I want to, let's see here. I want to show you, wait a minute, somewhere in here, I can go back. No, that's not it. There's a way to go back. What did I just do? Oh, now it's time. Stupid thing. Okay, how do I turn that off? Okay. All right, well, I know there's a way somehow. Oh, here it is. I want to show you this map again. Okay, where the judges are. But notice how regional they are. Okay, so they're in a local area. Their ministries or their judgeship is in a local area. This is a time. There's no motor cars. This is a very small area, as Rob and Maureen can tell you, and anybody else who's traveled to Israel. It's not very far from north to south. But back in those days, you're doing it by foot or by horse, right? Or ox. Okay, so it's not easy to get from place to place. And so these armies come in, and Gideon is facing, as we say, the Midianites. They're off to the east here somewhere. His operation, his field of operations is in this area in the middle. Okay, so that's where he's working. And let's see. So Othniel, we see him. He's in the south. He's working in that area. Samson against the Philistines. He's working over here. Jephthah is located here, and he's fighting against the Ammonites over here. So what I'm saying is, even though the scriptures do not tell us now let's just see here. Let's get this going. Even though the scriptures do not give us the entire, I'll just back off that one last statement. They do not give us the entire overlapping of various judges. It stands to reason that probably some of them did overlap. Okay, there was an oppression in the north, there's oppression in the south, maybe there's one in the middle, maybe happening at the same time or roughly overlapping. Okay, so I think that's reasonable to conclude, and we have proof that it did happen at least once. So then I have this statement from Smith's Bible Dictionary. On the whole, it seems safer to give up the attempt to ascertain the chronology exactly. Okay, because it's not really meant to give us a chronology. But our curious minds, we want to fit it into an order. And so some people then will attack the Bible and say, oh, see, the Bible isn't being accurate here. Well, that's not the way they're thinking in that time frame. They're not thinking about chronology, and that's not the issue. And so that's why I bring this up, again, because this is an area where people will say, oh, the Bible is not accurate. Well, it's just numbers, and they're thinking in a different way about numbers than we are. Okay? So, and that's part of the other number problems we've talked about before. Again, it's the same kind of thing. We have a thing in mind. they don't necessarily have the same thing in mind, okay, as we do. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay? All right. Nobody's raising their hand. Whew, got through that. Okay. So, the last thing. The last words on the Judges period. Okay, so first of all, three main incidents. So this is chapters 17 through 21 plus Ruth. Three main incidents characterize this period. So first of all, the sin of Micah and Dan. And this is idolatry. And you can read about it in Judges 17 and 18. And it's not a nice story. At the end of Judges, we do not have nice stories. They are just illustrating the sins of the people of Israel. And let's go, first of all, to Judges. I want to go to Judges 17:1, and I'm going to read the opening. Oh, it's not there. Maybe I'll find the place where it is. Oh, 18:1. Okay, go to chapter 18, verse 1, if you've got your Bibles in front of you. Here's what it says. In those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in, for until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession. So, the key phrase, in those days there was no king in Israel. In chapter 19, starts off, now it came about in those days when there was no king in Israel. So we see this emphasized again and again in these chapters. No king in Israel. So the sin of Micah and Dan, the tribe Dan, the immorality in Benjamin. All right, so there's this story where this fellow's traveling with his concubine, it says, and she ends up getting murdered. And this is a horrible situation. It's a horrible story. It's not nice reading. The Bible doesn't gloss things over. Okay. Like ancient literature, often all you hear about the kings is the good stuff they did or the good things that happened. That's not how it is in the Bible. It tells it like it is. Anyhow, this woman is murdered. So the guy chops her into 12 pieces and sends her to each of the tribes of Israel. It's a horrible story. And so then he says, we need vengeance. This can't happen. The tribe of Benjamin refuses to deal with this city that caused this crime. And so then the rest of the nation goes to war with Benjamin and almost wipes out the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so that's the last section of it. That's how Judges closes, with those two incidents. It's actually very depressing. Okay, it's very hard to read. Okay, so then we have one more instance, the nobility of Ruth. So then you turn the page and you go to the book of Ruth, 4 chapters. Ruth is a Moabite woman. She marries a man from Judah who had moved to Moab because of a famine. And so then her husband dies. And she decides, the mother-in-law decides she's going to go back to Judah. She's heard things are better. And she starts back, but she urges her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab. That's where your people are. Ruth says, I'm going with you. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Okay? And so she goes. They're living in poverty. She gets the notice of a wealthy relative of Naomi's. And of course, she marries him. That's the short end. That's the short side of the story. And she turns out to be, I think it's great-grandmother of David. Okay? So here's God's grace. And there's this noble story. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Sort of like you read Judges and think, oh, that's awful. Okay, so then read Ruth. Then you see. Now, all of these instances happen earlier in the Judges period. Okay? So there's certain things, certain indicators in there that we can tell. This isn't and the time of Samson. This is some time before. Even in the genealogy of David, you would have to put Ruth back some point in the earlier part in the Judges period. So what it tells us is this. They are showing conditions in Israel during this time. Okay, this is how, when we're talking about there's no king in Israel and the people behaved wickedly, well, these are examples of how they behave, those first two stories. Okay, and then, on the one hand, they show what it's like when there is no king to restrain the impulses of the people. And then, on the other hand, Ruth shows that some remain faithful. And God providentially provides redemption, both individually and collectively. So individually, there's redemption for Ruth, but collectively, there's redemption for Israel, because through Ruth comes David. Okay, so this is what's going on. We have, and when we talk about how bad the Judges period was, we're not saying that every person in Israel was equally bad. Okay, obviously there were some people who still had faith. That's why they could at least call the people to repentance at some point in the story. But that's what that last section is about. Any comments or questions? Tola?
Yeah, my comment is we should make, as a Christian, we should make a difference
Yeah,
in this generation, this corrupted and polluted generation.
absolutely. The lesson we take from this is to make a difference in our own generation. Absolutely. All right. Rob?
Well, I was just going to reiterate what you're saying about Ruth, that it's a great book to study if you get some study guide with it, because
Yeah.
it also points to Christ as the kinsman redeemer.
That's right. There's a lot of prophetical actions that look forward to Christ coming.
Yeah, and you can see by the Judges how we're so lost without God.
That's right.
So,
Yeah. The Judges show us how lost we are without God, but Ruth shows us simple faith in God that produces a great deal. Yes, Suzanne. Suzanne. Yes.
Well, even though I guess generally, excuse me, the story of Ruth is a positive one, the way that she had to initiate that relationship with her future husband was pretty demeaning.
Well, part of that is you're reading that with 21st century cultural eyes.
I don't
And
know
the culture-
that for any woman to lay alone overnight
Uh,
beside a strange man.
No, you don't understand the culture. That's this is a different. It's a different cultural expression. So I'm going to defend Ruth on this and say that she's not demeaning herself at all. She is actually being very appropriate, and
She was following Naomi's instructions.
and she's following her mother-in-law's instructions. Yes, but it's certainly, when you study the culture of the time and what they've discovered about that era, it certainly is. It's not the way we look at it from our perspective.
God
So,
behind the scene.
Yeah, that's we can't. One of the things when you're reading the Bible, we can't read it in terms of our context, because we're talking. So this is 3,000 years ago, totally different way of life. So we can't be judgmental about what is done in those days, because it's not our world. Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? Tola.
Yeah. I think it has been pre-planned by God.
Yes.
The way that Ruth case just went through the whole situation, God knows about it and He has prepared it.
That's right.
And God is telling us that anybody that puts his faith on Him,
Yeah.
he can do anything.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what human being, the way we see
Right.
it or the way we think about it.
Yeah.
The case of Ruth is just God.
Yeah. Okay, so what Tola is saying is that ultimately it's God's plan in operation. So we look at the period of the Judges and you think, man, here God redeemed these people out of Egypt. Here they brought them through the wilderness. They brought them into the promised land. Now you would think we're going to have a great kingdom for God. Okay, but they didn't. And ultimately, even so, the wickedness of man could not frustrate the purpose of God. And so the story of Ruth shows us that God, in fact, is accomplishing His plan despite the wickedness all around her. All right, Augustine.
I think the lesson for me is God knew yesterday, He knew today, and also knows the future.
Yes.
A good example is when God led those people to the river.
Mhm.
God knew He's going to pick 300, but He wants it to be obvious
Yes.
that characteristics should display and select those 300.
Yeah.
And because I could imagine God had gone into the minds of those 300 already,
Yeah.
that this is the way they should drink.
Yeah.
And he can as well select them. So the lesson is, let's submit completely to God
Yes.
and
Yeah.
allow Him to rule.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic, actually, because, if God had said, okay, I'll take this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, just 300 guys, Gideon would say, well, why them? But so God makes a test that Gideon has to distinguish, and he says, all right, Okay, you've broken up. Here's you got the 300, and you got the rest of them, like however many. I guess that would be 9,700. Okay, send those guys home. Like, what? Here I am. All right, and it's tremendous. God's working. All right, let's close with a word of prayer. And if somebody would like me to talk more about the period of Judges, I can deal with some of these things, but I really want to move on to the United Kingdom next. We'll slow down. This is basically, we're covering 300 or 400 years in 45 minutes. We're going to slow down. We'll talk about Samuel, Saul, David, Solomon in a little bit slower fashion over the next few weeks. All right, let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for this time that we've had looking into your word. We pray that you would help us to understand it and to see your working in all of this history as you're bringing about our redemption. In Jesus' name, amen.